Welcome to another episode of Out of Spec Dave, where today I've got a very special guest on what is Father's Day. I've got Kyle, my son, and it's interesting to me because when Ford came out and announced that they were supporting the NACS Tesla standard, and then GM followed it, I've seen a bunch of, and I made a couple of videos about this and tweeted about it. I think it's a big deal. But I've noticed that there's so many additional things that have happened since then. So I thought what I would do is ask Kyle on Father's Day, as my Father's Day present, to come on and just share his thoughts about what's happening. Now, he's been on the road an awful lot, been meeting with a lot of Chargepoint operators, and I just thought I would kind of pick his brain and see where things are going right now. So let me bring Kyle on right here. Kyle, how's it going, sir?
Hello, good. Happy Father's Day. Thanks for being my dad.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. I guess I didn't really have a choice after you were born,
Right.
so
You're stuck with me.
yeah, I am. And you're stuck with me. So, Kyle, it's really interesting to me how many things, or what seems to be so many developments that are happening in terms of charging infrastructure and commitments by different various companies. And I've been watching some of your videos, and one of the things you pointed out to me was that there are three different categories, or you pointed out in one of your videos that made sense to me, is that there are three different categories of companies. The first being the manufacturers of the cars, the second being the manufacturers of the charging equipment itself, and then the third being the Chargepoint operators. And I thought maybe what we could do is kind of break down this video into each of those three segments and go through what's going on, what are you hearing with respect to the manufacturers of cars, what are you hearing, and so on. So I thought maybe you could start with, what are your thoughts about Ford throwing in the towel on CCS, and the video you put out maybe a week or two ago about CCS is dead. I thought that was great. I watched the whole video and I learned a ton. But what can you tell me about your thoughts on the manufacturers of the cars themselves and joining this whole Tesla thing?
Well, first of all, maybe we should talk about, because there's some people who probably haven't seen all the coverage, and for some people this will just be a repeat, but hopefully this will kind of wrap up to where we are going into the third week of June 2023 with this process. The most important thing to understand is what are we even talking about? And the first is we have 2 or 3 different charging plug types in America. There's CHAdeMO, there's CCS, and there's the Tesla connector, which is now rebranded North American Charging Standard NACS. And the whole idea here is to try and get the whole country to use one connector. That's my idea. I think this is our opportunity to set truly the North American Charging Standard, whichever it is. And
Hey, can I ask you one quick second? You say North America Charging Standard, and you just said the country. Does North America Charging, are you including Canada here or no?
Yeah, Canada's going to follow whatever the U.S. will do, but Mexico's the wild card because they have an even crazier situation than we have, and that should be another topic
Okay.
for another day.
Gotcha.
Because there's like GBT cars in Mexico, which is wild. But let's not confuse everyone. The whole idea here is the CCS is I would say predominantly what everyone's charging on right now. Tesla uses their own plug type, and no question the Tesla plug type is better in almost every way. There's no argument that I've heard that says CCS is good because of XYZ. Some people try to say it's good because it supports vehicle to load or vehicle to grid. Well, guess what? So does the Tesla connector, and it will probably use the same communication language. And there's a very, very few weird arguments for CCS. But ultimately, if you put both handles next to each other, these are the two plug types competing for each other in the US right now. The Tesla connector is more elegant. It's a nicer interface. It supports higher current limitations, and it's just the better connector. And very few people will argue with that.
And by the way, Kyle, mom can actually plug that into her car. Whereas remember trying to see her plug that CCS into her GV60. I mean, it was crazy. 2 hands giving up. It was nuts.
Sure. And no question the Tesla plug is better. But, and there's a big but, the CCS connector is what everyone else uses except for Tesla, and including Nissan as well. They've been Chatham on the Leaf, but now the Aria is CCS. And so the big question becomes, do you know, if the goal here, or if the trajectory is moving towards one plug type, or a winning plug type, if you will, like USB-C was for small devices, is it the right move to go with Tesla, or is it the right move to go with CCS? And in my opinion, it's to go with Tesla. Now, that's not the reason for all of this stir. The reason for the stir up here actually has less to do with the plug type and more for a push for reliable charging from Ford and GM that want to give their customers a good charging experience. The reason is Tesla built out their own charging network using only their plug type, only North American charging standard connectors, Tesla connectors. Everyone else is using CCS. And so that would be Electrify America, EVgo, Blink, Chargepoint, et cetera, using CCS connectors. And it has less to do with the plug type and more to do with access to that walled Tesla supercharger network, which is the reason that Ford and GM are going to switch the plug type on their vehicles, offer an adapter for legacy vehicles to gain access to that very reliable, very high quality Tesla supercharger network experience, in comparison with truly the absolutely subpar, terrible experience that every public network offers in the US. They're all bad, and Tesla's the only good one.
Yeah, Kyle, listen, I just got down to the condo on Marco. I left yesterday morning, 6 a.m. I charged 6 times in Mom's new Model Y. Every single time, plugged it in, and it worked. I mean, it was downright boring. I was waiting for something to go wrong, and nothing did. And nothing ever does, at least not for me. It never has. I've seen here bits and pieces here with that Rate Your Charge, some sessions. As a matter of fact, there was one station where I was looking at, I think it was a 21 or 22 station or something like that. And it actually said on the Tesla app, unit number 3A is down. And I was like, wow, I've never seen that before. But when you compare this experience that I just had driving this Model Y down here to what I did in April with my Lucid Air, which is an amazing car, charges super fast, it's got crazy range. I had the most insanely bad experience driving down, and then it even got worse going back. And so, I mean, like, it's insane to me that a charging network could actually make someone like myself say, is it even worth having a Lucid if it's supposed to be a car that is for road tripping? And here I just road tripped the Model Y down in 6 stops and no issues. It got me going. So I'm sorry, I just had to vent a little bit on that, but I've just literally been in the car for the last 36 hours, and it was an amazing experience.
Right, and that's something that just can't be repeated with any CCS trip. I mean, I've road tripped, and a lot of this is regional as well. It's based off of plug type. It's also based off the type of car that you have. I see a lot of Bolt owners, as an example, sort of advocating for EA, saying, hey, there's not many problems, but their car only takes 50 kilowatts. So even like the most broken charger can give 50 kilowatts. But when you're rolling up in your Lucid Air, that should accept 351 kilowatts is what we found. And you're getting 50 kilowatts. Well, that's, end of the world problem. That takes your, 15-minute charging stop and extends it to 2 hours plus. And it can be really a pain. So ultimately, there's no question. This is why we started Rate Your Charge. We have the data. The Tesla supercharger network provides a better experience consistently than maybe the inconsistent experience of CCS, all networks combined, where sometimes you might have great charging experiences or great sessions, and sometimes you may not. A case in point, I just took my Rivian on a road trip, 3,000 miles towing. The drive out to California was fairly good. I think I only had 2 or 3 small problems, which for CCS is pretty amazing. 1,500 miles to only find 2 or 3 stations where I had to move or unplug or do things. I thought that was fairly good. Conversely, you just did the same distance in the Model Y and didn't even think about anything. So, significantly better performance and quality of charging. So that's the reason that Ford and General Motors had interest in using the Tesla supercharger network, because charging anxiety, it's no longer range anxiety. Charger anxiety is becoming for those that own and understand electric cars, the number one issue to buying a car.
You
So
know,
many people.
Kyle, I could, that is exactly what mom and I were feeling on the way down here. I didn't have any anxiety about what's going to happen when I pull in. It was a calm road trip. It was just uneventful, no anxiety at all. Not because of range, right? The range on this Model Y, the long range we got, it's you're getting solid. At the speeds we're going, I'm going 250, 260 miles. Guess what? I gotta stop. I'm hungry. I gotta use the bathroom, right? But I've with the Lucid, I was worried about what's going to happen when I plug in. Is there even going to be an available unit? Forget about, I hope there's a 350. I hope there's a 150 that will actually work. So yeah, charger anxiety. That's what it's all about, right?
Totally. So it has less to do with plug type and more to do with access to the supercharger network that can at least deliver that experience that you've had. Now, the other side, just before we get into these three categories, is it's important to remember a couple things. While the Tesla connector is the better interface, if you just put a Tesla connector, if you add NACS to the public charging stations out there that use CCS, it will change literally nothing. Nothing will change at all. And so that's going to do nothing for reliability. What it is going to do is let cars that have the NACS inlet port or an adapter access to the supercharger network, which is going to drive free market competition, and it will give drivers of CCS cars like you and your Lucid and me and my Rivian, it will give us options to say we're going to take our money elsewhere and go to Tesla. Even if we have to pay more money per kilowatt hour, it will drive the user to the better experience.
Kyle, we have that already as Tesla owners with the adapter, right? The CCS adapter.
Right. And we see Tesla owners occasionally charging on CCS networks to get cheaper charging prices. Right. And guess what? That's awesome. It's all about being able to plug any vehicle into any charger. That's the point that we need to get to. And then you can say, do you value price? Do you value charging speed? Do you value reliability? Do you value safety? And then you can make your own decisions as to where to charge based off of that. Today, it is impossible to make those correct or your decisions for your own personal needs of charging because there's no access to the Tesla supercharger network for third-party vehicles. Now, two things to qualify that with. In Europe, a lot of Tesla superchargers are open to the public and you can use them, and you do see other cars using them because some value that reliable experience, but it is expensive. And conversely, in the US, there are 11 stations, 12 stations with Magic Dock where you can charge CCS natively on the supercharger network. So that's where we're at today. That's the reason that all of this has come up. And then it's really led me to a push to say, if Tesla is going to let anyone with a NACS inlet port charge on their network, if they're going to offer adapters, if automakers want to give their users, their drivers, the best experience by offering access to the most premium, well-rounded, most built-out charging network in the world, then let's just all put NACS ports on our cars, and let's put NACS ports on all the chargers out there, and let's put NACS ports on everything. NACS the whole country has been my thing, because then to the new EV driver who doesn't understand, who doesn't want to research what adapters they need, how to do all this stuff, they can just natively take their car to any fueling station, any charging station, and charge up. Just like you can buy a Toyota Corolla and go to any gas station and put gas in it. And so that's what we need to get to for the masses. So yes, it's going to be a bumpy road. Yes, it's going to piss some early adopters off. They can just get an adapter and be done with it, is my impression. They'll also probably have access to the Tesla supercharger network with an adapter. It hasn't been confirmed, but that's needed for this to work, in my opinion. There's a lot needed for this to work. But yeah, just a super exciting time to cover cars. And but everyone knows my stance. I'm like, let's just put NACS ports on everything.
So Kyle, you mentioned something about so Tesla's one thing to be able to have the NACS port. Obviously, that's already on a Tesla supercharger. And then the manufacturers to either come out with an adapter or natively put the ability for their car to charge on an NACS. But I want to talk a little bit about, let's say, Electrify America. By the way, on the way down, I stopped over at Naples. Mom was yelling at me. She's like, don't go there. I went, and believe it or not, all four of the stations at the Walmart were actually up and running. But imagine if you take one of those 350s that's there, and you just put a different cable that's got the NACS port on that. You said that's not going to change. Like, can you explain to me what that would do? I mean, why would I go to Electrify America with a NACS, with a Tesla adapter that and plug that into even my, let's say, my 2025 Ford or GM that can take a NACS natively, or even my Tesla today? Wouldn't I still have the same problems as far as the infrastructure not being able to put out the right amount of energy, or the fact that they're typically down a lot of times? It wouldn't solve that problem, would it?
No, not at all. It won't change anything. It'll be up. If anything, I think it'll just put pressure on Chargepoint operators to realize when users stop using them. Right now, if you buy a Chevy Bolt, if you buy a Lucid Air, if you buy a Porsche Taycan, you're strapped pretty much to one network to get around. And that one network has consistently delivered a subpar experience. Now, that's not to say they will always deliver a subpar experience, but it's very possible that having users just kind of abandon and take their money somewhere else might wake them up and say, like, actually, you know what? Rather than just pissing customers off, they obviously don't care about that. This is now they're losing income. Right. That might drive them to produce a better charging experience. One can hope.
Right.
So the NAX cable, the NAX port has less to do, again, with the actual improving reliability and more to do with free market competition among charging networks.
Okay. Now, so let's talk about the charging, the manufacturers of the actual charging devices themselves. There's ABB, you can rattle these off a lot better than I can, but are they, and Chargepoint is one of those manufacturers. And by the way, that video that you did at Chargepoint, I've always loved those videos when you say, how does it work, or how is something made? I loved that video. I thought it was so fascinating. The fact that you're my son and you were going on that tour, I even forgot who you were, because I was just like, all those pulleys and different things. If you haven't watched that video yet, anyone who's watching this, it's on Out of Spec Reviews, I believe, right, Kyle?
That's right.
And it's how Chargepoint, all the quality control and the manufacturers, and they really rolled out the red carpet to explain everything. I was fascinated with that. So I get a little confused, because couldn't Electrify America, they don't manufacture charging stations, right? They buy those from manufacturing companies like ABB. Couldn't they buy them from Chargepoint? Is that something that could happen?
Yep, they could buy from whoever, as long as it integrates with their back end. They've pretty much decided on 2 suppliers moving forwards, at least in the near term. Maybe they'll announce more. But they started with 4 and they whittled their way down to 2 suppliers just to reduce complexity, I imagine, to make it easier to integrate on the back end. And those 2 suppliers are BTC and Signet. Not known, both of them, to have the best, sort of reliability or anything in the business, but I'm sure it was a cost decision. And also the equipment that EA is installing moving forward, that it was spec'd by them, and a lot of it was engineered decisions made by Electrify America, because they're buying so many chargers for these folks to produce, and they use the same dispenser. So it's hard to tell for the user to know which one they're charging on unless they look at the label on the dispenser.
Okay, so the reliability issues that I have experienced and many others have experienced with Electrify America, is it Electrify America's issue or fault, or is it the manufacturers of the charging stations, or is it can you explain to me why everyone is having such a subpar experience with EA? I know
we're bouncing all over the place, but I think that might be a better individual topic. I'll tell you, if you ask EA, they'll say it's because we have to integrate with all this hardware, and there's a lot of new software out there, and it's not easy. And then you ask the charging hardware manufacturers, and they're like, well, we provide our hardware to a spec, and then it's integrated wrong on the back end. And so it's a lot of finger pointing, and it's always someone else's problem in these situations. But ultimately, I think we've kind of all agreed, all the companies and the users, that if it has a Chargepoint operator's name on it, if it says EVgo, if it says EA, if it says Chargepoint, that's a different topic, but we'll get to that. Chargepoint owned and operated stations, which they do, then it's that company's issue. If you're using an EVgo station and it's down, well, it doesn't matter who made it. It's an EVgo problem. is
Yeah.
my impression. But on the back end, like, that's why you need to select the right suppliers. It's why you need the good integration to work from day one. And, a lot of the early charging problems that we experienced were totally excusable in my mind. They had to build a charging network in record time using, honestly, very subpar chargers that were on the market. And it just set the whole network up for failure. And it's been hard for them to dig themselves out of this hole. But I think the excuses are almost over at this point. It's been 4 years, 5 years, has it been? They should have designed and built their own hardware day one, knowing that everything on the market was bad. And they just couldn't. There's certain regulations and things. So ultimately, using the NACS port, if they put a NACS port on their charger, all of those problems won't change at all. And if anything, it might actually get a little bit harder and a little bit
Yeah.
worse because there's some slight differences with NACS that will need to be integrated.
Right. Now, let's talk just a little bit about the charge point. Is it
Well,
the right
we
way?
jumped through three. So we were talking originally about the Automaker
Right,
perspective,
the
which we
Automaker.
haven't even touched on yet.
So
So
since the Ford and GM announcements that have been made, are there any others that have come out? What was that three-wheeled solar car that you and we saw that thing out in San Diego?
yeah,
Weren't they the
Aptera.
first ones to go with, what is it called again?
Aptera.
Aptera. Weren't they the first ones to say that they were supporting NACS years ago?
Yeah, that's true. They were the first, but they also don't manufacture anything, so it didn't make a difference to the industry in my mind. If they had the right idea, they were totally correct. We like the guys there, but it made no industry impact because they have not made one series production model yet.
I see. Okay, I got it.
But I guess the bigger topic that I know you're trying to get to is what would Mercedes say if you asked them, or what would Volkswagen say if you asked them if they're going to switch, or
Or like
what would,
mom, she just sold her GV60, right? Because she's going to be down here for the whole summer, and she doesn't want to even go over to the EA Naples, right? She wants to have a Tesla because of the charging. Because we don't have any charging here at the condo, which is a whole nother thing. We've got a light socket that powers an uplighting on a palm tree that only goes on half the day, and it's a 120. So it's like we don't have charging here. So what about some of the other manufacturers? Has anyone announced yet that they are also going to be supporting the
no?
NAC standard?
Well, not necessarily. No announcements. But let's look at what automakers might be thinking. I think that's interesting. If you're in the head of Hyundai, Kia, if you're in the head of Mercedes, what do you do? Because if you look at the response of Ford, honestly, shaking up the entire charging industry originally, and GM on their tail announcing as well. Now you have the three largest American EV makers switching to one plug type, the better plug type. And it's going to provide, again, those users, those drivers, a better charging experience with access to the supercharger network. So if you're Mercedes right now, you better be like, holy crap, what do we do? Because they recognize, especially Mercedes and others, that there are charging problems out there, and each automaker is trying to figure out the right way to do it. And Mercedes is building out a small network with Chargepoint that's going to be very high quality and things like that. And I talked to the Mercedes guys, by the way, about this quite a bit at length, and really tried to drive the point home that they have to switch. They didn't say they were or weren't going to, but I was like, look, you have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason an automaker has to switch, especially sooner rather than later, is it because it opens up more options for charging, and again, that better experience that a premium electric vehicle buyer is looking for. We've seen so many people buy Teslas just for their charging, even if they hate Elon, even if they hate the car. They need to drive electric, they want to drive electric, and they want to be able to get around without issue. And so that is why we see a lot of Tesla sales here. Now, does that mean Tesla is going to sell less cars as Ford and GM install NACS ports? Maybe there's just enough market where everyone can be maxed out. That's not for us to worry about. None of this really is. It's just for us to report on. And, if you're talking to a German automaker, especially BMW or Volkswagen, they're going to be the last ones to switch because they're heavily invested in CCS. Most of the decision makers don't live in our market, and they see CCS2 working wonderfully in Europe. So they can't relate or understand some of the problems that we have here. And again, many of the problems are not related to the connector interface. They're just related to the third-party networks, which, I've taken a Taycan and just did a video in Europe. a few months ago where I ripped it at top speed down the Autobahns, every single stop plugged in, max speed, plug and charge working perfectly. That experience can only be had with Tesla in the US. And so the sooner automakers switch and support this, the faster this transition time can happen, the less confusion there will be in the marketplace, and ultimately it'll be easier. Also, there are some engineering decisions that go into this. There's extra cost involved with adding a NACS port, because it's not like you can just, when you're an automaker, you have to engineer the car to support charging on CHAdeMO for Japan units. We're talking about a global car. You need to support GBT in China, Chaoji, which might take over in China if you choose to do that, CCS2 for Europe, and CCS1 for the US. Now, let's just say US, Canada switches to the North American charging standard. Now that's an additional one that you have to engineer the car with, but you're not removing CCS1 because South Korea, because South America still use CCS1. And so you're adding an additional layer of engineering cost. And it's not just the inlet port in the vehicle. It's actually a little bit more difficult than that from an automaker side, because the pins of the NACS port use AC and DC. And what that means is that you actually need extra switchgear in the vehicle, adding cost to the car to support the AC to DC switch through a contactor in the actual charge controller. And so that is complicated from an automaker perspective. So what they need to value is access to the Tesla supercharger network worth, and is our audience, our audience, our customer, sort of desires and needs, and for the amount of percentage that they're actually DC charging versus AC charging, which is very small amount of DC charging, is that worth the extra engineering time to switch to NACS? And I would say, if you look at consumer behavior now, if you look at most drivers' wish lists, for example, there was a question on the Rivian forum, should Rivian switch to NACS? It was like 78% were like absolutely needed to switch. The consumers want the switch. We want access to more drivers. Is it worth the engineering cost? The answer, I think, is yes. There's other considerations from an automaker perspective which would maybe delay a switch time, specifically for Hyundai, Kia, Genesis, specifically for Porsche with their 800-volt system. The reason is currently there are no version 4 superchargers installed in our country. They're about to be installed. I can't give away any details, but it's going to be awesome. Right now, we are all version 3 chargers. Version 3 superchargers only support up to 500-volt charging, which means if you plug a Hyundai Kia in, it has to use the onboard booster.
Same with my Lucid, right, Kyle?
Same with your Lucid. Same with perhaps Rivian Max Pack, if that's high voltage. And Tesla has not come out and said, we will reconfigure our version 3 chargers to support 1,000-volt charging, which I believe they will. And the reason I believe they will is they're already doing between 880 volts to 1,000 volts DC bus between the supercharging cabinets. So the charging units itself already support high voltage. There's just going to be a slight reconfiguration inside the actual charging unit to bump it up to 1,000 volts, and then a cable change because there's a high voltage version of the NACS with a little bit extra insulation in there. But it is, compatible backwards as well. So you can still charge an earlier car that may not support 1,000 volts with it. And so it would take maybe a technician a day to upgrade a site.
Kind of like what they did with Magic Dock, right?
A little bit like they did with Magic Dock. And They have not committed to doing this. This is just my prediction. I think they will. And as soon as they tell automakers, hey, all of our thousands of version 3 chargers will be able to support full speed charging up to 1,000 volts, to match the pack voltage of the car, that's when Hyundai, Kia, Genesis can say we're in. Because what they can't do is say, we're going to put a NACS port on our car and limit our customers to 100 kilowatt charging.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same thing for the Lucid. What are we getting? 45 kilowatts on a V3 Magic Dock? It's
totally.
It's crazy. I'm better off in an EA getting 50. It's 5 more.
Absolutely. So I think that's another big automaker consideration, especially with many automakers and their future products going up 800, 900 volts following, the efficiency trend. As more, tier 1 suppliers start having parts for higher voltage, the prices will come down to do that. There's very little downside to going high voltage.
So Kyle, just a quick question. If what you're thinking is that Tesla could take a V3 and up the voltage, why would they even put V4s in?
Well, V4 is going to possibly be an entirely different architecture with higher power limits. It's their next generation. So it's more than just supporting high voltage. It's going to be different. And they have not released any specs. We don't know. But much higher current. They're going to have immersion cooled cables on the dispenser side. Totally, next level charging. Way higher than even high voltage V3 would be. But think about it this way too. Cybertruck, they claim, is going to be very high voltage. Think about it. They're installing so many version 3 chargers out there right now. Do they just want to limit Cybertruck to only V4 chargers or use an onboard booster? Or maybe they'll do a GM thing where they split the pack in half, driving normally, and then put it into series when you charge so that you can double the pack voltage.
I was in Halifax, North Carolina. They had 12 V3s there. And then all of a sudden, when I looked at the map on the Tesla app, it said they're 20. And I went in the back and they had 8 additional V3s there. And I went inside and I was paying for, I don't know, some cookies or something stupid. And I said to the woman behind the counter, hey, just out of curiosity, are those 8 working? She goes, oh, absolutely they are. And in addition, by the end of this year, we're going to have 24 more Tesla superchargers. And by mid next year, they're going to have even 24 more. So they're going to have 68 superchargers in Halifax, North Carolina by a year from now. Think about that. That's crazy. It's
honestly needed. And to be totally honest as well, the networks, even if they were working perfectly, the third-party CCS networks are not expanding at the rate that new electric cars are being sold.
Right.
And so we're starting to see major lines at CCS stations, especially in California, but that's starting to work its way east as electric cars gain in popularity. And the problems are only compounded when the stations are operating at reduced output or, just failed. So I would say right now, the general concern is, can you get around in a CCS car? Am I worried that I won't be able to charge? The answer is no. I can pretty much get the car to charge, but am I able to get the car to charge at its maximum on third-party networks every time? That is a very rare thing to happen. And there's always some little niggle and problem. Meanwhile, Tesla chargers tend to rip. They're great. And they have a really good architecture that does site level power sharing, which we don't need to get into right now, but it's just awesome. Mm-hmm. So, I'm very excited to see what automakers do here. I really think Tesla's 1,000-volt support comments or announcement, when that ever comes, that will be the make or break. If Tesla says version 3 won't support 1,000 volts, there's no way half the automakers will ever switch, because it just leads customers to a much poorer experience with slow charging. Right. But if they can support 1,000 volt and 670 amps, they're doing right through that thing, through that cable, that everyone's going to be in on that.
So where are we going to be 6 months from now? What's your prediction?
From an automaker side, we'll see more announcements for sure. I know there's a lot of automakers considering it. We know a lot of people in the industry, and they all want to do it. No, I haven't really talked to anyone in the industry that says this is bad, other than maybe Char and fighting for CCS, but that's a different situation. Automakers understand, and they're excited to provide their customers with an easy charging experience. There's a lot of questions though around how these Tesla deals are being done. Does Tesla own the data? Who's going, there's some things that need to happen, which we'll get into later in this video, specifically around Tesla not controlling the entire experience. Automakers need to feel comfortable that their prototype vehicles aren't getting data logged by Tesla when they do interoperability testing. There needs to be third-party ownership of the North American charging standard, engineered by Tesla, but ultimately they need to have a large minority stake in its future going forwards. That might hurt everyone in the long run in terms of third-party consortiums like Char and supporting NACS, because it might slow things down. You have more opinions in there. Tesla can't just say, here's what we're going to do and go for it. But it also will probably provide automakers the stability knowing, hey, if we put NACS on our car, it's nice knowing Tesla won't one day just shut off the network to us. And so having third-party control over the standard and the interoperability testing in terms of labs that can do that is a really important thing, as well as the 1,000-volt support for automakers to gain confidence to switch.
So can you tell me just a little bit about Charn? From what I've read and from what I've heard, they've got some of the smartest engineers over there. Are they embracing, or are they actually giving the Heisman to NACS? I'm a little confused. And what is Charn? What do they do? I mean, what is their role?
Yeah, well, their role in CCS was very large. Their role in NACS is still yet to be seen. It may be nothing, but essentially they're a consortium of a lot of key industry players. No one really directly works for Charn, aside from a very few people. Pretty much everyone is an industry member, either from the Chargepoint Operator or the charging hardware manufacturers and automakers, that all get together a few times a year with a few meetings a month, whatever it is, to discuss CCS and the communications between the car and the chargers to hopefully improve interoperability. And it's worked okay, but it's very slow moving, as you can imagine these things would be, especially when you have a ton of different opinions from a ton of different companies. And it means sometimes people are fighting for their own self-interests or their company's interests, and not always fighting for the end user. There's, sometimes privacy concerns are blown out of proportion. Sometimes the opposite happens. So when you get so many voices in one room pushing and holding the standard forwards, it's a very slow moving ship to get everyone on board to get it moving. But ultimately, it means that automakers and charge point operators can feel comfortable using it because they know everyone involved, and it's not just one dude who might be crazy, controlling this standard. So with NACS, they have just recently announced, I think in large part thanks to Out of Spec, because we really pushed them on this, to say we are in full support of NACS as long as there's an independent body, this is what Charan is saying, to control and to oversee and to influence the integration, the communication, and the interoperability between car and charger. And that is needed, whether or not Charan, certainly Tesla hasn't joined Charan yet in this, and Tesla controls NACS. So it's not a thing until Tesla joins, and they may never join. So, or they might create their own. We don't know. We don't know what the future holds for Charan in terms of NACS. But either way, CCS will be here forever, CCS 1. I say CCS is dead, but that made a great video title and got people talking, and that was ultimately the point. But other markets use CCS 1, and there's millions of vehicles with the inlet port on it. We'll be dealing with this for the foreseeable future, maybe at least 30 years until these vehicles reach end of life.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, it's obviously there's a lot of moving parts here. And if I'm a buyer of an electric vehicle today and it's not a Tesla, I think that from everything that I'm hearing, I'm actually feeling more comfortable buying a CCS car than I was maybe 2 months ago because of the chatter that I may be able to use the Tesla supercharger network. And I'm just curious about, do you think that's a valid feeling that people should have as consumers today because of everything that's going on in the market? And I understand these things are slow moving, and there's a lot of business conversations happening, and a lot of very interesting strategic partnerships that are going to have to be formed in order to make all this happen. But do you think the average consumer should be less concerned today purchasing a CCS car, or more concerned?
Well, I think either way, it doesn't actually really matter because adapters will exist both ways. So if you buy a NACS car today, if you buy a Tesla and Tesla decides we're ripping all the NACS out, we're going CCS, which that's not going to happen, then you'll have an adapter Tesla to CCS, which exists and people use them all the time. And if you buy a CCS car today and ultimately, you buy a Ford Mustang Mach-E, Ford has already said you will get an adapter, whether or not you have to pay for it or get it for free. It sounds like maybe for free. You'll be able to take your Mustang Mach-E and charge it on a supercharger network with an adapter. That's a great confidence boost. We don't know how this is going to play out. It may never be open to the public, and NACS may never be the worldwide the countrywide standard that it should be. But time will tell. And, it's all very interesting. But, we can do a whole thing on consumer behavior and buying patterns based off of this, maybe for the guide channel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make a lot of sense.
So Kyle, also these adapters that I know that both Jim and Mary had mentioned that they're going to be having by, let's say, the spring of 2024, and then building the actual native NACS, adapters into the cars by, let's say, 2025. Who is it? Is it Tesla that's going to be manufacturing these adapters, or is it going to be Ford and GM? I
No,
don't
no.
get it.
Tesla has already said they're making the adapter,
They're
which
the
is
ones. Okay.
yeah. Mhm.
Well, that gives me a lot of confidence then that if Tesla puts out an adapter, do you think that it will be a specific adapter for Ford cars and then a different adapter for GM cars?
No, it's going to be one universal adapter because they're both CCS, and
So
the
then
adapter.
what so that if that's the case, then what does it matter if any other manufacturer comes out and says we support NACS if the universal adapter, let's say I have a Hyundai Kona, not an 800 volt Ionic 5 or what have you. Would I be able to buy that same adapter that a Ford, Mustang Mach-E user would have and plug my Kona into that adapter and I could charge on a Tesla supercharger?
Well, definitely the interface will work. Whether or not you'll be able to activate the charger is another question. They might be using ISO 15118 communicate or a certificate exchange to say verifying this is a Mustang Mach-E and it's Dave's Mustang
Oh, I
Mach-E and
see.
only he has access to charge on this charger. Or
Okay.
they might be using another form of communication with MAC address, where each vehicle has their own unique MAC ID. It's Auto Charge Plus for EVgo. We set that up on your Tesla, and
Okay.
so Teslas already support this. The
Yeah.
other cars already support this. GM does. Ford, I believe, supports MAC address, but it's easy for them to implement. And it's a little less safe and it's a little less complicated than a certificate exchange with ISO 15118. But there are ways to verify partner vehicles. I think personally, what's going to happen is there will be this adapter, which people can buy, and buying the adapter will let you gain access to the supercharger network. It may not work as seamlessly as Ford and GM with the plug and charge that I'm sure they're going to implement. However, it's not that big of a deal. You can just download the Tesla app,
Yeah.
select the stall your activate, just like it happens with Magic Dock or in
Right.
Europe.
Yeah. When I charged up at Brewster on the day that Magic Dock came out, I used the Tesla app to actually activate the GV60, not the GV60 app, right, or the Electrify America app.
Sure. So ultimately, Tesla has not announced that will be possible yet.
I
But
see.
my gut feeling is all the pieces are there. Tesla wants to sell electricity. They need their utilization to be as high as possible at all times of the day, as much as possible, to reduce demand charges and make supercharger a reliable and profitable business for them.
Right.
And so there's no reason for them not to open it up to everyone other than reducing congestion at busy sites. So they may say, if you are a Ford or GM partner vehicle, you can charge at any supercharger. But if you're a public user, only these are open to the public,
Right. Right.
which we don't know how they'll do it. Well,
Because
we've only just talked about pillar one, which is automakers.
automakers, right?
Right. So the next pillar you said was it charging hardware or Chargepoint
You
operators?
you pick whichever one you want to go with. To me, the way I framed it out was those were the three pillars, right?
Right.
So
So let's do charging hardware because that's easy, which is if you're ABB, if you're FSEC, if you're Signet, if you're ChemPower, if you're Tritium, whoever, all you care about is selling your very expensive chargers to people who will buy them. And you sell them by creating a reliable, fast charging, easy to install, interesting ways of handling power sharing. Everyone's got their own take from a hardware manufacturer. And honestly, there's too many hardware manufacturers right now, and we're going to see a consolidation, in my opinion, into the future. But if you're one of the big ones, if you're Alpitronic breaking into our market here, if you're ChemPower breaking into our market, if you're Tritium breaking into the market with high power chargers, well, one cool key differentiator that you can do is offer a North American charging standard port alongside CHAdeMO and CCS to give whoever's buying your chargers ultimate flexibility. Because the people who are making the equipment are not running the equipment. They're not responsible for selling electricity. The only ones who really do that would be ChargePoint. That's a very unique business case for very few sites that they operate, many of which are here in Colorado. But largely, they're just selling the equipment to the end to the ChargePoint operator, and they want to give as many options as they can. So almost every charging hardware manufacturer, large one, has said we're in full support. We want to sell chargers. If you want to buy chargers with NACS, we'll put a NACS cable on it and we'll go. The hard part on their side right now is what cables are you going to put on? Because no one sells NACS cables. We saw XCharge at EVS 36, and they were the only ones to demonstrate a working North American charging standard equipped charger. And they had to have their own custom cable manufactured for this.
Do you think Tesla will sell the cables?
Yes, they will.
Okay.
But
And,
we don't know at what cost. We don't know at what length. We don't know at what versions of them. My understanding is there's some, I really don't know the details. Everything's rumored at this point, but I'm fairly certain Tesla will sell. I've heard that from multiple sources now. Tesla will sell NACS cables. I don't know in what sizing configurations.
right. Okay. All right. All right. So from a hardware manufacturer standpoint, it sounds like you're going to have, whether you have definitely CCS and NAX, whether or not someone wants to, be nice to the Leaf owners and throw a Chatamo on there as
No,
well.
no, no, no,
I
no.
mean, that one seems like that's just not going to be happening.
There's no need to put more Chatamo units out there.
Right.
If
Okay.
anything, we're kind of
All right.
past that.
So forget Chatamo.
What there should be is an adapter for Leafs to charge on CCS or NACS.
Right. Right. Well, listen, I mean, I bought the Tesla adapter, right? Chatamo into.
Chatamo doesn't work this way.
Okay, well, forget that. So it seems that though the hardware manufacturers, they're for the most part all in on supporting NACS. They're going to be providing cables. Who's going to manufacture the cable? Is somebody going to come out and do that? The V4 cables that you're talking about for that liquid cooled and all that, they're going to be much more complex. It would be great if Tesla had a side business and sold cables out the back door instead of just having it vertically integrated.
Yeah,
So
but
that,
you need more than one supplier just to reduce risk. And
understood.
Tesla stuff, as far as I understand it, is not UL rated. And so there's no UL approved NACS connector on the market right now, which is needed for third party operators. Tesla can get away with it because they meet UL standards. That's just not UL approved.
Right.
And the other thing is when Tesla sells their cables, that's going to be one side of things. But the other side of the business, and we're going to do some conversations with cable manufacturers on this. I don't think we're going to see thinner cables or different cables. Like, we're going to see those same juicy, thick cables you see on the Electrify America stations, just with a NACS port, because the current ratings are only going to go up with NACS, and the cables are rated, UL rated, to have that type of, current limitation. And so the reason that they're so thick is because we have standards in the US that they need to meet in order to be safe. And Tesla just says, no, we're just going to do it our way. And it's the better way. And they are extremely safe and they work great. And it just shows that when you can ignore all the noise of the large industry and just go your own way, it's better. And so that's why I have concerns about Tesla actually joining the Charin consortium with the NACS connector. They may just keep it all to themselves because it turns out to be better, but it doesn't gain user confidence or large corporation confidence with that.
Within the pillar of the hardware manufacturers, what other variables are there that you want to bring up today on this call?
Nothing. It's just a cable swap. The integration is very easy from the charging side. It's going to speak the same ISO 15118-2 communication. So there's almost nothing that needs to be done on the charging side that's different. Some chargers you may not even have to tell that you put in a different cable. I mean, literally, it could just be a simple cable swap out in the field. And what I'm sure we'll see a lot of is one side of the charger having NACS, the other side having CCS, much like we see Chatamo and CCS out there. Ultimately, there's some considerations from a hardware side that, this UL stuff, but ultimately it's very easy for them to offer it. As soon as they can buy a cable to sell on their unit, they'll be good to go.
All right. So that brings us to the third pillar, which are first of all, can you define what a Chargepoint operator is? I've heard that term, but give me an example of one, and what is their business model? What do they do?
Well, a Chargepoint operator is responsible for operating charging points, and that means that they're the ones that own the chargers that you drive up to, and they're responsible for, hopefully, dispensing the electricity into your car and billing you for that. And, some go farther and they have grid, connections on the back end to help stabilize the grid. If they have battery storage and other things, there could be other roles that they play. But generally, they're responsible for dispensing the electricity into the electric car that plugs into their unit. They handle the billing, they handle the site design, they handle the installation process, and they handle the speccing the hardware that they're ultimately going to use.
Okay. And so the major away from Tesla, which is completely vertically integrated, both from a software and a hardware standpoint, manufacturing not only the cables, but the units, the dispensers themselves, all of the hardware behind those dispensers that you see, those big white boxes and all of that. They're doing the billing, they're buying the electricity at one rates, charging, marking it up and selling it to you. They're doing everything vertically integrated. And in my experience in all the businesses I've worked in, when you do everything yourself and you control it all yourself, that's when you can really guarantee, or have a very high, reliable, delivery of something that is obviously what Tesla does today. It's the network itself. These charge point operators, it seems like the business model that they are in. So on one side, they're buying hardware from many different manufacturers, even though there's standards in the ISO standards you talk about. And then on the other side of it, there are multiple cars that they have to support at the same time. And they sit in the middle. And it's this one-to-many challenge that sometimes when I get frustrated at EA, I have a soft spot in my heart because of the situation they're in, having to handle all of these different hardware management. I know it's their responsibility. And then to be able to sit in the middle in a reliable way. But so I want to pick your brain a little bit about what can these charge point operators do to minimize that risk and to try and replicate that same experience that I get when I pull into Tesla. And the last thing one of the things I want to say to you is that what upsets me is when the manufacturers of the cars align themselves with charge point operators, and then they say, here, you can charge your car for free over the next 3 years at this charge point operator. And what that does to me, first of all, if you buy a Lucid Air, do you really need 3 years of free charging? I don't think you do. Okay. That's number one. Number two, if you're Lucid and you align yourself with Electrify America, you're now putting your firm online and your reputation for any of the variables in the negative experiences. Because if I'm buying a Lucid and you say go to EA and charge it, that's where I'm going, regardless of the fact that it's pretty much the only other nationwide network along all the highway routes. You don't really have any other choice. But if you could just talk a little bit about this challenge that these charge point operators have sitting in between these two different sort of, diversified, decentralized purchasing of multiple hardware devices on one side, and then being able to support the cars and the manufacturers on the other. How are they going to really navigate that complex business model, Kyle? It just seems like a tremendously difficult challenge to try and replicate what Tesla's done.
Right. Well, also, before we even get into that, think about Tesla's position as they start opening up to other automakers and other cars, especially if they open up to everyone. Tesla works amazingly well, but they make the hardware, they make the software, they make the vehicles that are plugging into it, right, and they own that whole thing. They've only had to really ever charge 4 models natively. And those 4 models, that's really easy to get right, especially when you own the whole process.
Because haven't a lot of people been having trouble charging like Ionic 5s on Magic Dock?
Well, that was my next point. Tesla, we sing the praises of reliability because we're plugging in their own product to their own product.
Right.
As soon as you bring an Ionic 5, an early one, or even Ionic 6 to a Magic Dock station, sometimes they just won't charge at all. And that is a huge problem. And so it might turn out to be, we don't know because none of this has happened, that Tesla is less reliable than others when they charge third-party vehicles. Now, I'm going to say it's very unlikely because if you look at Europe, they've already been charging a whole bunch of cars and it works fairly okay. Right. But I can think of as soon as 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I took a Polestar 2 on a road trip from Copenhagen up to Gothenburg, Sweden and back. And I stopped at a Tesla version 2 supercharger to plug in the car and communicate, and it wouldn't charge. And I couldn't do it. And I had to go to a garbage, I don't even know which network it was, no name third-party network just to get the Polestar charge, even though I was relying on the supercharger network. So their reliability comes from them charging their 4 models. Mm-hmm. However, Tesla, I think, has done a lot of work in the last 2 years to open up and charge multiple vehicles, especially Ford and GM, of which they'll have partnerships with. They're going to make sure in laboratories before they ever hit the market that the supercharger can charge the car and the car can charge on the supercharger. And this is all coming down to interoperability, which is a really fun thing that I'm into, which is getting the car and the charger to connect. It has nothing to do with the charging station reliability after you get the car to connect, whether it's derating due to temperature or power module failure or back-end billing. Just the simple process of getting the car and the charger to talk to each other is rough. And a lot of that comes down to there is a standard, which is ISO 15118-2, which is what we use right now. But there's different ways that you can interpret the standard. And I was talking to my friend Tomi, who's the CEO of ChemPower, and we have a famous saying that he did on our podcast, which is, if you're a charging hardware manufacturer like they are, and if you're Tesla, a charging hardware manufacturer, do you follow the standard to your best interpretation of it, or do you just charge cars? Which means you're going outside the bounds of your interpretation of the standard. And ultimately, with the standard, to be honest, kind of sucks because there's different ways that it can be interpreted. There's different time limitations for different processes. There's something called charge parameter discovery, which is when you plug in the car, it says, I want to speak this language. And then you have to put voltage, high voltage on the line for an isolation test. All of these things have different time limits, and there's this dance between the car and the charger. For example, the car has to have the contactor open during the isolation test, and then that has to end. Then it can basically do a voltage match. Then it closed the contactor so you don't have inrush current. And this is a very, finely tuned dance between the car and the charger that sometimes chargers aren't tuned to handle the car side, or cars are engineered weird. They show up on the market and then they go and charge on EA, for example. And it's like, yeah, the car is the problem, but EA is saying it's faulting. And, no one knows. And so I think there needs to be a push for more transparency to the user. Fault codes need to be more standardized so that when you have an issue, you know exactly what's going on as the user. And that the Chargepoint operator knows what's going on, because sometimes they're not even getting the data. And a lot of this comes down to the work that Charin does, to be totally transparent, which is events like testing events where they get all the different chargers together and all the different cars, and they do hundreds of sessions between cars and chargers. They find issues, they fix them, they all put the data together and try and optimize the standard to reduce this into the future. With Tesla opening up and charging multiple cars, are they going to be as committed to a fully functioning interoperable network? That remains to be seen in America. They've done it in Europe. They've done a good job. But also Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6 have had issues on Magic Dock for 6 months, and they're still not fixed. And so it's really up to Tesla to get their ass in gear to fix these interoperability issues and to stay on top of them. It's also up to them to figure out a safe place where automakers can bring their prototype vehicles before they hit the roads to make sure that they work on the supercharger network, especially if they're a partner of Tesla, but even more so if it's a public, if Tesla says, if anyone who has this adapter can charge here, they need an independent testing lab that people can bring their new cars to. And this stuff happens all the time. We've visited labs. We've been in FreeWire's lab as an example. Just recently, I filmed in ChargePoint's interoperability lab. And that's where automakers bring their cars and say, hey, can you just make sure that your equipment works with my car so that when it goes on sale, we don't have any issues? Because some, especially small automakers, can't send over the air updates to fix things. And then it's up to the Chargepoint operator to say, are we going to adjust our chargers to charge that car? And by us adjusting our chargers, does that mean other cars won't be able to charge on it? Right. And it's very complicated. So that's step number one. We're not sure Tesla is going to be reliable as they charge third-party cars. They haven't proven it because Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, EV6, these problems are not fixed with eGMP. And whether if it's the car that's out of bounds or the charger, doesn't matter. It needs to charge cars. So I'm all for opening up your view of the standard if you're a Chargepoint operator, or a charging manufacturer, and just charge cars. Back to the public topic, which is to improve reliability of this middleman effect, where you're buying someone else's hardware, where you're operating someone else's car, and then you have back-end payment processing. And all of these things need to come together to work and to provide the user a seamless experience, which is pull up, plug in, tap your credit card, whatever it might be, do Apple Pay or pay with your app, however the payment needs to be done. I actually am not that particular in this area as maybe I should be, but I'm okay with however you tell me that I need to pay for it. Just tell me and make it easy. And, that's hard for a Chargepoint operator to do because that's a lot of different things that need to be integrated. And there's some open charging standards. OCPP, Open Charge Point Protocol, is one of them to communicate link all of these things together. There's also OCPI, which happens to do with roaming networks, so that if you have a let's say Electrify America account, you can charge on a Chargepoint charger, using that one account. Now, I use that as an example because Electrify America has never been open to roaming. They don't want to partner with anyone. And since they're our largest network in the US, they're really hampering, I would say, our roaming capabilities in our market. Whereas Ionity and Allego and EMBV and all of these different European networks all support roaming. And then I can basically just carry around my one plug surfing card, which is a third-party service that works on all the different networks.
One to many, yeah.
That makes it so much easier. But we don't have anything like that in the US right now. Other than Chargepoint and EVgo would be the two big ones. They roam.
Right. Man,
so back to the Chargepoint operator with NACS, because we haven't even discussed that yet.
Yeah.
I know we're an hour in or whatever.
No, it's this. I'm keep going, Kyle. I'm fascinated. So,
well, there's just a couple other points that it's good for people to understand, which would be, if you're a Chargepoint operator, when do you put NACS on your chargers? Well, first of all, the good news is there are so many Teslas on sale that you will instantly have a user base as soon as you put a NACS cable on your charger natively. The downside, which no one's talking about, which is kind of hilarious, is that if you have a Tesla built before, I forget the month, but sometime mid 2021, it actually won't charge on NACS. It won't charge on the Tesla connector.
What do you mean?
My 2019 Model 3 Performance, I cannot bring it to a NACS third-party charger because it won't charge. It'll plug in and it'll just go red. Say sorry.
Why?
Because North American Charging Standard speaks ISO 15118, the CCS standard. My early Tesla and all the Teslas before it don't have the ECU in the charge port to speak CCS, to speak ISO 15118. They speak DIN 70121. They also have a little Tesla CAN communication to do the superchargers.
So basically proprietary Tesla only.
Yeah, fair. Yes, you could think of it that way. It's basically CHAdeMO.
Remember, this is out of spec Dave here, Kyle. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So confusingly, they speak CHAdeMO, which is why the CHAdeMO adapter works.
Right.
It's CAN communication.
I see.
And so what that means is all the early Teslas are going to need to be retrofitted to charge on NACS, which is really funny. And, is
that going to be another adapter or is that a retrofit?
We have endless content for years to make on this transition. Because it's very cheap, and Tesla's doing it, and they're already retrofitting S and X, and they had to do this in Europe to have S and X charge on CCS chargers, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But we have a lot more early Teslas here than in Europe, and also a lot.
That's a hardware implementation, not just an OTA.
It is not software; it is a hardware retrofit.
Okay.
Yep, and it's like a couple $100. But that's going to be really confusing because then it comes down to, oh my God, when was my Tesla built? What month was it in? And The only way to know if you have a Tesla and you're listening to this is you hit the car on the bottom left of your screen. You go to software, you go to vehicle information. You have to hit view more or view additional information. And there it will say CCS enabled, and it'll say yes or no.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the same thing for the, excuse me for using CCS Combo 1 adapter, and that's what Tesla calls it. But if it doesn't say that, then you can't use the CCS adapter, right?
Right. And the car doesn't actually know if it's the adapter or NACS. It just knows something that speaks CCS.
Okay, well, but it's the same exact issue.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Right. Because remember when I bought that Model S, the 100D, I was all pumped to be able to try out this adapter. And you're like, that thing doesn't support it. It's pre, you got to go and look in the software. So I was like, oh, bummer.
And there's going to be at least 50% or more of the early Tesla buyers, especially who pick them up on the used market and just need a car. They're going to roll up to your charge point. If you're a CPO, if you're Electrify America, and you put a Tesla connector, a NACS connector that speaks CCS, and you pull up in your 2014 Model S 85 and you say, let me plug this thing in, and the interface works perfectly, and it plugs in. And it goes, charging failed. Sorry, can't communicate to your car. Guess who you're going to blame? You're going to blame Electrify America because it's not charging your car. And so this is going to be a whole nother can of worms that we'll get into. I don't know how we're going to educate people on this.
I don't know. I
So
don't
it's a
know.
huge consideration for Chargepoint operators as to how they're going to brand this. There's no precedent. No one knows how to explain any of this. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the market. Ultimately, what's the reason to switch to NACS? That's the thing that I am very excited about, but maybe I'm having a hard time conveying my excitement. The reason to switch to NACS, why I want everyone to support it, is because moving forward, we need the fueling experience, which is any car can plug into anywhere. It means that your home unit can be NACS. It means that your unit away from home can be that same exact connector, NACS, that you can plug into anything. And it just means that the new EV drivers, again, we have very small EV penetration, the new EV drivers will have a very seamless experience. But this 4 or 5 year transition over to NACS is going to be a bumpy road. It's going to be very interesting. We're in the best business to cover it because it means we have endless content to talk about all of these things. And not all of it's great, but also I think a lot of it is great because you're gaining access natively to one of the best charging networks out there without the use of adapters, which adapters on day one are maybe fairly safe. But as they age, as they build up resistance, it can be a danger. And so, the reduction of this transition time will reduce the number of adapters out there. It will mean that new buyers will just have an easy experience. They can plug in any car anywhere, and the early adopters are going to have to adapt and basically weather the storm because that's what you get when you buy in a new technology. So,
Right.
it'll be interesting to watch it all unfold. But from a ChargePoint operator perspective, that early Tesla situation is going to be really interesting to watch play out.
All right. So can I summarize? Can we go through a quick summary? And then before we end the video, I do have another question for you. But within the hardware manufacturers, between now and the end of the year, how many more major manufacturers do you think we're going to see that will come out and say, yeah, we're supporting this?
I think it all depends on what Tesla says. I think they need to be a little bit more public about supporting higher voltage. They need to be a little bit more public about assuring automakers that their data is going to be safe, that they're not going to be just shut off from the supercharger network one day randomly, that Tesla's not going to go full crazy mode one day and just, they're a grown-up company and they've got to play grown-up games, which is you need to be predictable, you need to be reliable, and companies need to be feeling very safe to work with Tesla because Tesla has been a name that is the most taboo name in the auto industry ever. They do not bring up any existing automaker. If you bring up Tesla in a meeting, you're a rebel. You're going to get fired the next day because it's just seen as, just ignore Tesla. We don't want to talk about those guys. And guess what? Tesla is killing everyone. So what they need to do is do the opposite. They need to be talking about Tesla every single day in every meeting. It needs to be the forefront of the conversation to say, what can we do to match Tesla and ultimately to try to get that experience, that sort of mindset of Tesla in the legacy auto business to now say, hey, we're actually going to partner with those guys on the charging. That's a big jump.
Yeah. Well, listen, hats off to Farley, right, for breaking the ice there. And so similar question, or before you go down the path of where do you see the actual manufacturers, what announcements have come out since let's call it the Mary Barra, Twitter Spaces? Who has come out from the manufacturers of the charging stations publicly? Was it EVgo that did an announcement? Am I wrong?
Well, that's a ChargePoint operator, but yes, they're in full support because GM's their biggest partner. So if they want to charge GMs, they got to put Tesla plugs on their stuff. Ultimately, there's no reason why ChargePoint operators or charging manufacturers would have issues doing this. They're trying to A, sell units if you're a manufacturer, and B, if you're a ChargePoint operator, you're trying to sell electricity. What the heck do you care what people plug into? There's going to be a little bumpiness with charging older Teslas and the branding around that, but you just want to dispense electricity. So, just put the cable on your charger as long as there's a cable to buy.
So I had made a couple of statements when I saw the Ford announcement that Tesla would end up having a monopoly on selling energy, and the question is, are they going to turn into a Standard Oil or an AT&T and get broken up from a distribution standpoint of selling electricity? And a lot of people jumped on me and they said, Dave, you're not quite getting this. the Chargepoint operators themselves, if they install the NACS handles and have the reliability, then it's a free game. Where am I going to actually go out and charge? And so if you provide a consistent experience of getting energy from Electrify America, as an example, or EVgo, then I may go there if I have a Tesla, as opposed to going to a Tesla supercharger. But today, the reason I go to Tesla, even though I have that Combo One adapter, is because I get a better experience. I don't have to worry about it. I have no charger anxiety.
Right,
So
better locations, more consistent experience.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so I get that, but I also see Tesla having a, call it, 13-year jump on stations that are in the ground now that are reliably charging, and you got to wonder, like these other charge point operators that are buying all this hardware that are putting all these in the ground, how many years behind Tesla are they? And so, look, I don't know where this is going to go. It seems a bit exciting to me in terms of the ability for additional manufacturers of cars to be able to charge on the supercharger network. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me saying, you know what, Dave, I am going to keep my Mustang Mach-E because of this announcement, even though they're not even going to have the adapter until 2024. Just the promise of having that, they're saying, I'm not going to sell my Mach-E now. I think that's a good thing for the industry. And when you listen to the Twitter Spaces, especially the one with Mary Barra from GM, Elon, he said, look, whether or not you buy a Tesla or whether or not you buy a GM product, I think the guy genuinely, look, he's crazy. I love the guy, but he genuinely believes in having this transition go forward. And he's not, he can't be indifferent. I mean, he's running a for-profit company, but there's something more there that's going on when you're partnering with manufacturers like that. And I think that's actually a good thing.
Just to play devil's advocate for a second, because this is a topic that we touched on earlier, which is Tesla's interoperability with other vehicles. All it takes is for your car to charge on one Tesla supercharger successfully, then they'll charge on all of them just fine. That's a really nice thing to know. Sometimes if you plug into an EA station, but you plug into a Signet unit, like your Lucid with Signet Surge, you have a terrible experience. But then you also go to a different Electrify America charger, and it might be an ABB, and you'll get the fastest charge of your life. And so there's
but only if it's but if it's cold out or hot out, I want to use this charger versus that one. And it's like I watch your videos and I go, like, where the heck do I charge? EA should be EA, right?
Sure. But at least with Tesla it is, because they manufacture all the hardware. So yes, interoperability is a concern. If they can get the car to charge reliably and connect once, in theory, you can go to any supercharger with no concern. That is very much like a day one launching a vehicle product. If it has issues working with the supercharger, like we're seeing Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, once that problem is solved you can charge that car in any supercharger just fine.
Right. Can we shift gears now? I think we've covered the three pillars. There's probably a lot more we can do and we should do, but there's something that is just not adding up to me, Kyle, which is, why in the heck are there only 12 Magic Docks out there in this entire country when literally it took a crew maybe 2 days to convert over Brewster, New York, as one example, right? Why is that the case? Because didn't Elon commit to something like, I don't know, 7,500 stations by the end of certain time? And I know tax dollars are at play here, but is there something going on with all of this new chatter that is going to, let's say, not even create the need to convert V3s to Magic Dock? Help me understand this.
Well, totally. I think a few things at play here. The first is the tax situation, the NEVI funding to build out new chargers. Tesla committed to putting in 7,500, J1772 or CCS ports, and I forget the mix between them of DC and AC chargers. But ultimately, all of that funding was written before Ford and GM and Tesla all decided to go in hardcore on the Tesla plug. Now you have, again, the three largest American EV makers all committing to this better plug. And then you have legacy US code that's signed into law that says use this old crappy one, or at least the more complicated one that we don't want to use anymore. I think there's some significant lobbying going on here, especially when you get the new big three, which is Tesla, Ford, and GM in the US. When you get those guys all saying, we want to do this, I think they'll change the wording or adapt it to allow NACS for federal funding for charging stations. At least I hope. And if that doesn't happen, then we'll see more Magic Docks out there. If it does happen, then I just think that's going to change.
Because of the change that's happened since the wording was written, and because of the fact that we're not really sure as the manufacturer as Tesla right now the direction that things are going to go, we have now hit the pause button on Magic Dock.
Totally. Why spend the money? I think what Magic Dock happened. Sorry to interrupt you. I think what happened with Magic Dock is. They opened up NACS to everyone months ago. They said, hey, use our connector. You're welcome. This is great. And then they just didn't even get a single email. There was just dead silence. And then you had little Aptera in the back going, yay. And that was it. No one said anything else. Right. And then I think they're like, oh crap, no one's actually taking us up on this. Like we gotta backtrack and support the CCS build out here. And I think that's why they engineered and they installed Magic Dock in that test environment to do interoperability.
It's so freaking elegant. I mean, it's just beautiful.
It's good, but it's still limited on current output at 300.
No, I get that. But I'm talking about like from a physical standpoint and how they did it and how simple it was. Now, granted, the cables aren't long enough. And we got Tom Malogny almost hitting the baluster, and it's like with his F-150 Lightning.
They removed those bollards after his video.
I know they did there, but where was I recently? They still had them at a couple of other Magic Docks. I think I've been to 8.
It's not a perfect scenario.
I've been to like 8 of them, Kyle, because they're all in upstate New York. Because aren't they all manufactured in like Buffalo or something like that?
Yes.
So and a lot of them still have those whatever they are, ballasts or whatever, the metal, the poles. So
just back to that really quick. I think they started to install them. They started to do interoperability. Ford. I mean, Jim Farley follows me on Twitter, which means he sees Rate Your Charge reports. He knows what's going on in the charging space. Mary follows me as well. She sees the reports. I don't know how often she uses Twitter. I don't even know if it makes a difference. But it is interesting to know that no question Ford fans and GM fans were excited to use the supercharger network. And that should send alarm bells off at every company. And I think it did. And I think that's when Ford called up Tesla and said, all right, what do we need to do to use your network? Yeah. And that's when Tesla said, oh, crap, this is real. And I think that just like stalled Magic Dock right there. Might be dead forever. There might only be 11 or 12 Magic Dock stations in existence ever because we're seeing this transition to NACS.
Right.
Or the federal funding situation may not change, which is going to totally delay this NACS transition. I'm in full support of don't give funding to any CCS station. Just give it all to NACS. Let's transition as soon as possible. And you know what? Use some of that funding to retrofit early cars or to offer adapters from a government level to the early cars and say, hey, thanks so much for helping clean our air. Buying an electric car as an early adopter. Here's an adapter. Good luck through your transition.
Right.
I'd rather see the money go there than to incentivize $7,500 off of a, EQS or EQE, built in Alabama. So ultimately, I think it'll change. I think there's going to be some lobbying. That's my hope. And I think Magic Dock could be dead forever. Mm-hmm. Or they could put it at every station. We are not sure.
And by the way, if they do decide to put it at every station, I think Tesla could get it done in 3 months.
Yeah, I know they would be like this.
It'd be like bang, right? They just bang it out. I mean, they got a guy in a van who pulls up with some parts, and literally a day and a half, he's done.
It's only a few hours per each site, I would say.
Well, yeah, but whatever. So, Kyle, listen, my head is spinning. Kathy, Excedrin, please. All kidding aside, this has been extremely insightful. I haven't had a chance to catch up with you. You've been running like a freaking madman. I don't even know where you are. I watch you on Twitter. You're my own son.
This is my kitchen.
I know that's your kitchen. But I'm saying I was like, where are you right now? You're in Milan? Why are you in Milan? Like, I can't even keep up with my own son. This has been a tremendous Father's Day gift to me, just spending time with you. And I know we talk at least 2 to 3 times every day, but not to this level. Sure. And as I was driving down here from Connecticut, over the past day and a half, I started to think about everything that's going on in this charging world right now. And I said, you know what, I gotta ask Kyle to come on my channel. So I really appreciate you joining today. This is just the start of the conversation. And I know that with your efforts and whatever I can do to help as well, just by asking the right questions, we really need to have these kinds of conversations out in the open. The voice of the consumer, ultimately, I think it's simple. It's very simple. What I did over the last 2 days, I mentioned this today in one of the tweets I put out. It was downright boring to charge my car coming down here. Simple, boring, uneventful, zero anxiety. That's what everyone needs for every single car. And so all the people that are working behind the scenes, we appreciate what you're doing, right? I get it. I know it's not easy, but that's the ultimate goal. Don't forget about the consumer, about what we're trying to do, which is that experience that I had. And it's here today. It's here with a Tesla. I could buy a Model 3 Tesla rear-wheel drive for 38 grand, get $7,500 federal tax credit. And if I'm in the state of New York, I get an additional $2,000. I'm buying the car for $28,000. And you know what? That car charges better from Connecticut to Florida than a Lucid Air on the CCS network today. And that's a shame.
Well, I guess what? If you want to, you can still plug that car into CCS or chat them out. You can plug it into anything.
Right. I could do that too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, enough, Kyle. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your help. I really, really want to thank you. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. If you've stuck with us this entire video, thank you very much. We'll catch you on another episode of Out of Spec Dave, and we got to continue this conversation. Kyle, thanks again for joining. Everyone, take care now. Bye-bye.